Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a senior and accomplished professional from the US, Holly Jean Jackson. Holly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me here. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Thank you. Holly is a revenue and performance consultant. She's the CEO of Holly Jean Jackson, LLC. She's a speaker, a podcast host, and an author, and she's the founder of Business Builder Throwdown. So, Holly, before we talk about revenue and performance, tell me a little bit about your own journey.
Yeah, it's been a windy path, which I'm sure from the thousands of folks you've interviewed, they probably have similar but different stories. I actually started off in the nonprofit space and then moved across country with my husband at the time and started in the corporate space, worked at universities and then worked at Visa, Treasury Wine Estates, and was very successful, but I kept experiencing layoff after layoff. And my layoffs were also coupled with new health challenges, not good ones. And I just kind of recognized this pattern that I did not appreciate and realized that corporate America for me was not the best fit for my body and who I am. So I decided to start my own business. So I'm on a mission to help heal the world by helping business owners who are doing good and having ripple effects in their communities through the services that they offer by helping them be successful, scaling with more monetary value so that they can have a foundation, a charitable donation, or even start a nonprofit in addition to their business.
Oh, wonderful. And, you also state that you design a roadmap for impactful visibility, intentional profitability, and endless sustainability. Help me understand these three things that you mentioned this and give me an example.
Yeah. So if we're talking about being successful as a business owner, it comes down to those three things, right? You need visibility. If you don't have visibility, people don't know that you exist. They don't know your story. They don't know the difference that you're going to make in their lives. They don't know the problem that you solve. So we need to have really clear, impactful visibility. And in the marketing space, that means sharing your stories very effectively, understanding the brand story, and connecting in a very authentic way. Then when we look at profitability, especially today with the craziness in the world with the economy and all the things changing post-pandemic, we need to make sure that you have intentional profitability, which means looking at all your revenue streams, making sure that not all of your eggs are in one basket, and growing that revenue over time so you can continue to invest in the business and the people you support, your clients and your employees. And then when we look at sustainability, I walk the talk of what I teach. So I am not working crazy hours. I believe that having health and clarity in addition to your business matters and makes a difference for your culture, for your employees, for your clients. And so we want to make sure that as you grow your business, that it's sustainable. We look at your capacity metrics, we look at your long-term legacy, and we want to make sure you're still excited and building ultimately the right business for the vision and mission that you have for your life.
Amazing. Thank you.
Welcome.
Let's talk now about your role as a revenue and performance consultant. How do you define revenue optimization?
The simple way would be show me the money, right? So when we're looking at revenue optimization, it's really quickly looking at the organization's profit margins, looking at the revenue streams. And I can pretty quickly, within 30 minutes to an hour of a conversation with a business owner, see where their profit leaks are, see where their holes are. I can also relatively quickly, when wrapping my hands around not just their revenue streams, but their marketing, their funnels, their email, et cetera, where the low-hanging fruit is to improve and bring in immediate revenue and cash flow so that they can continue investing in the business and growing that. And then, of course, it's looking at, is there a gap in the market? Are your customers asking for something new? And that's a new revenue stream that we can provide that also optimizes the cash flow and bottom line for the business.
Well said. And based on all the work that you've done, what are some of the common misconceptions businesses have about revenue growth?
Yeah. So, in terms of these misconceptions, first of all, a lot of business owners assume that they don't need to continue investing in their business to grow, and that is a huge misnomer. I'm sure you would share this with me, and I'm sure thousands of folks that you've interviewed understand that to continue growing, you have to continue learning and investing to get there. You
Mm,
also have to invest in your people. So, if you have contractors, if you have 1099s, if you have employees, you have to invest in them so that they continue to reflect the client experience, customer experience you want to put into the world.
mm,
So, super important. People have misconceptions around this. Those are two. There are a lot of other
mhm, mhm,
misconceptions out there,
mhm.
but you have to be really sharp and stay focused on these things.
Well said. And how do you approach a business that has plateaued in its revenue?
Yeah, so when you hit a plateau, it means oftentimes you've either lost touch with your ideal prospective client,
Mhm,
or you've lost touch with the market, or you've lost touch with your creativity. So these three areas we dig into. If it's a market fit where you've forgotten and you haven't stayed in touch with your customer and you're missing out on some sort of market trend
mhm,
or something happening in the world, we simply look at that and then just pivot a little bit with your
mhm.
service or pivot how you're marketing to your prospects. So that's one of the things we look at.
Right.
Um, the other thing we look at is we want to start looking at percentages of the different pies of your revenue streams.
Mm,
If we are paying a lot per click for one particular revenue stream and it's like a lower ticket item in your revenue, we want to make sure that we really reinvest and
mm,
refocus our strategies elsewhere where we're actually getting more dollars. This is
mhm,
really getting creative, looking at the data, looking at the numbers, and pivoting where needed.
mm,
And in particular, right now, I've noticed that as we've gone through this pandemic and we have some things changing in the economy, you
mm,
have to stay very aware of what's happening in the world. And especially if you're international,
mm,
different regions, because if you're not, you're oftentimes mismatched with the market and you're incorrectly marketing, or you might need to actually broaden your niche or change it altogether if
mm,
that area is dried up because they've
mm,
had negative impacts.
mm. Thank you. My next question, Holly, is how has the role of analytics evolved in revenue optimization over the past decade?
Oh my goodness. So the more data we have, which we are definitely in this information age of having just so much data at our fingertips, I
Mm,
like to look at the numbers. A
mhm,
lot of times people think that their revenue, they think that the problem is lead generation.
mhm,
But when we get on a call, they're having 20 to 50 calls a week. That's not a lead gen problem. That's a sales problem. So we're
mhm,
looking at the data. We're looking at your sales conversion percentages. We're looking at your ads. We're looking at the top of the funnel. We're looking at your open rates for email. The more data information you have, the more we can fine tune what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, and we can actually get to that Pareto effect and invest more of our time in the 20% that's actually generating and
mhm.
driving revenue. So data has never been more important than it is today.
Well said. And my next question is that different companies have different cultures. How does a company's culture play a role in revenue and performance outcomes?
Great question. So people buy from people, right? And so if your company culture is not dialed in and aligned to the values
Mm,
of your organization, your
mm,
company,
mm,
people can see that, they can feel that. There's an authenticity gap.
mhm,
And today more than ever, people are buying based on what your company represents. They're
mm,
buying for sustainability, they're buying organic, they're buying vegan, they're buying,
mm,
these things that are important to them. We're in
mm.
this new era of social consciousness. And
Right.
so you have to make sure your culture is aligned to the mission and vision of what you're putting out there. And that means investing into your people because they're a direct reflection of your organization. So your
Mm,
company's culture directly affects who you're a magnet for with your prospects,
mm.
which affects your bottom line directly.
Interesting. And since you spoke about sustainability, my next question is how do you strike a balance between short term revenue boosts and long term sustainable growth?
Yeah. So when I'm working with a client who is in a drought financially, right? So they're struggling not because they're at a plateau, but they've actually lost a lot of revenue in the last quarter or maybe the last 2 quarters. We want to look at immediate short-term gains with revenue. So we want to get their lead gen dialed in, really optimize their sales, make sure there's a market fit, and get them some sales right away so that they can survive, because they're really in survival mode at that point.
Right, right.
And for organizations that aren't in that drought, we want to focus more so on long-term gains. But either way, I like to make sure my clients get a short-term gain as well as looking at the long-term gain, because obviously it's not sustainable without that. But in the short term, if you can get more profit, you can invest more in the long-term strategies. So you have to have that baseline to be successful.
Well said. And with the rise of digital marketing and e-commerce, how have your strategies adapted for online businesses versus the traditional brick and mortar options that used to be available?
Yeah, great question. So, depending on the organization I'm working with, which I'll say most of my clients are online or they're mostly service-based. So, we're doing digital marketing for the most part and not really as much of the brick and mortar. I'd say that this has given people so much more freedom and flexibility. They have, and this keeps them inspired. It makes their business more sustainable in the long term. I will say, when we're working with certain particular markets, the brick and mortar doesn't go away. There's still certain strategies depending on the company and the business you're growing, where you still want to do physical mail because it has a higher open rate, or you still want to have flyers, or you still want to, directly network and be involved with your local chamber of commerce, your local associations. And also, it's still very effective for people to grow their business through professional speaking for in-person events. And associations are hiring quite a few speakers for paid gigs at this point. And it's a great way for you to meet your people. But if you don't want to go in person, you can do it online just as easily.
Well said. The other question that I had was, when I was reading about you, was when you support people for revenue and performance optimization, how do you approach businesses with multiple revenue streams, and how do you prioritize these revenue streams?
Yeah, great question. I actually just had a call with a client yesterday that's local, and we're doing a marketing assessment. And they have 3 different companies. They have, like at least 40 different revenue streams across these 3 businesses. And so what we're doing is we're really just looking at what is selling well, what is resonating with the market. Is there a way we can actually improve that particular revenue stream so that it's selling even further? Are there revenue services that are not selling well, where we're spending a lot of ad spend or pay per click or investing time in other ways that's not really giving us the result we would like, so we can stop offering that revenue stream? And then, are there new shiny objects or new revenue streams that you're hearing from your customer base that we need to implement? And perhaps we could bundle some of these services together to simplify the sales optimization model as well as your revenue streams. These are just a few things we look at. There's probably a checklist of 50 to 100 things we're looking at when we're looking at their marketing assessment and digging into their revenue streams.
Amazing. My next question is that, how do external factors like an economic downturn or a global event like a pandemic influence your strategies? Or is this just force majeure?
No, I mean, they definitely, this is why I said earlier when we were talking about some of the other questions you asked, you have to stay current on what's happening in the world. If you're a local business, stay current on local, but also the global impact for your local community. And it directly impacts things. And in fact, I'd say for business owners who are still thriving today, especially small business owners and even medium-sized companies, if you're still succeeding and you started your business before the pandemic, especially when you're young in business before the pandemic, if you've survived that plus this beginning of this economic downturn, you can do anything. It is a rough time to just have started your company. But if you're smart and you pivot and you stay current, and you are able to meet your customer with payment plans, pivot the market to where people still have cash flow and they're still investing and growing, I look at recessions as an opportunity to do really well. And if you stay really in touch with all those things, you'll thrive. In fact, my business had the best 2 quarters of the last 5 years this year. The last 2 quarters were more successful, and we're in the middle of a recession. But that's because I'm being very intentional and following where my market is and what my prospects need today.
Fascinating. And Holly, what role does customer experience and satisfaction play when it comes to revenue optimization?
A huge role. The people who are just focused on lead generation and sales, they are missing out on so much. It takes a lot of money, a lot of investment of time to get those clients to become clients, turn the prospects to clients. So if you're losing your existing customer base, that's insanity. Why would you spend all that time and money to get a customer to then lose them? That's crazy. So we really dig into your customer experience, because today more than ever that matters. And you get referrals from customers if you do a great job. So I'm obsessed with the customer experience. And we know that once somebody buys something, there's something called buyer's remorse. And
Right.
especially if you have a high ticket offer, they're like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? I just spent 10, 20, $100,000 with this person. And they start freaking out. It's a part of humanity. It's part of the natural experience. So
Right.
having something to keep them in that honeymoon phase with you and show them how committed you are to them as a service, a product, a community, a subscription is ultimately super important. But then staying connected with them on their journey over time and keeping them as a customer for life is extremely important. Otherwise, you're wasting so much money.
Well said. Can you also share with my viewers and listeners a case study, without any names, of course, where a client saw a significant growth due to the strategies you advised them?
Absolutely. So I worked with a consulting agency 2 or 3 years ago. They saw a downturn financially, and this is related to the pandemic. It was kind of the early days of that. And they were mostly providing their services in person, but we had some opportunity to pivot fully online while also keeping some other in-person local services, because that was important to keep their customer base. So what we did first was we explored what revenue streams that we wanted to split test that would work online for their existing customer base. We looked at their email marketing list and saw some areas where we could kind of cut the list, but also we started experimenting with some low ticket offers that then were upselling into larger ticket programs, so that this person would have sustainable income over time. We also, as that continued to do well in that first quarter of working together, made sure that we had a scalable way to support people in more of a group methodology versus just one-to-one. And we started putting together scalable products. We had an online course, we had online drops, we had a subscription membership model. Not all of this at once, but over time we built these things. This person was able to not only survive that, but grew their business 250% in our first year working together, which is incredible during an economic downturn. And they are now being hired professionally to speak all around the world, extremely successful and considered a thought leader in their industry.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing this. And my last question to you, Holly, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. What would you say are 3 lessons you would give to small businesses or startups who are wanting to optimize their revenue and don't have a huge budget?
The first thing is kind of mindset related. Look at the way you see money. Because typically when people they have a small budget or they're having a lot of financial issues, there's something happening as a block. So I always have my clients write a letter to money as if money's a person, and then say everything you want to, and then read it back to yourself as money and see how you feel.
Wow.
Typically, there's a lot of stuff that comes up where you think money is dirty, you think it's bad, you have problems with money, and you need to get past those blocks before you can be successful. And that affects your strategies and how you show up. So the first thing is look at your relationship with money, because it's probably not on solid grounding, and that's probably why you're struggling financially. The second thing I would say is, and this is also somewhat mindset related, you must believe in yourself, and the best investment or gamble you could ever make is investing in yourself. So if you have a clear passion, inspiration, or vision, go after that thing. Do not ever, stop believing in yourself. Take big action. And when you make that investment, you're going to show up in a whole different way because you are committed to taking action in a big way.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the first biggest investments that I made in my business was terrifying. But I took huge action and grew, I think, like 150% that first year. It's totally worth it.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is never stop looking at your community for support. And that gives you more creativity. So if you have other business owners, other leaders, other mentors, coaches, mastermind groups, leverage their thoughts, share your experience, say, this is where I'm struggling. Here's some of my thoughts. What do you think? Leverage your existing community, get creative, and find scrappy, fun ways that you can build your revenue back to where it needs to be so you can invest further and continue to grow.
Fascinating. And on that note, Holly, and your 3 wonderful lessons, and I love the first one, look at the way you see money, and your advice, and I'm sure all of yours and listeners will take this very strongly. Write a letter to money as if money is a person and read it back to yourself. Amazing. That's something which, I think everyone should consider doing, because they suddenly will realize what money means to them, to their business, and to their people. Second, you said was believe in yourself or invest in yourself. And the third one you said was look for support from within your community, because there's never any challenge in asking for help. Thank you, Holly, for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me about so many different aspects of revenue and performance optimization. Thank you also for speaking to me about what are the impacts of different types of impacts that a business can go through, whether it's culture, whether it is digitization, whether it's a pandemic, and so on and so forth. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.